It's nice to sit on warm ground. I love it. Ooh. With all this corona stuff going around, I got to build up, make sure I got plenty of vitamin C, like these white pine tips. Not bad. Kind of like an acquired taste, like caviar. Actually, yeah, I got my vitamin C. It's almost like a little bit of a lemony flavor, if that makes any sense to you guys. Okay. Anyways, the assignment that I had assigned for you for this week was to read chapter 5 and 6 and then do 9 questions. You know, it's not a humongous thing to do. When I was in college, you want to know what work is? When they would pile it on you like a dump truck. Okay. Now we know that Brian is the main character. He's back up in Canada with a crew. They're going to do a survival experiment, but they're going to change it. Speaking of survival, I kind of I cut my arm out here. I'll have to find some tree sap to put on it to make sure it's okay. There's a trick for you. Okay. Starting with chapter 5. Get away, bug. He slept. He couldn't believe it, but he slept. The sound of the plane's engine and the warm sun and the sameness of the green forest all combined to hit him like a hammer, and his face went against the window, and he slept. The sound of the plane engine's changing sound, decreasing in pitch, awakened him, and he was embarrassed to see that he had drooled in his sleep. He wiped his chin. They were going down. Brian felt himself stiffen when the plane nosed down. He couldn't help it, but the descent was gradual and controlled and even. When they were still well above the forest, the pilot slowed the plane still further and dropped the flaps. The plane almost seemed to stop in the air, floated down toward the lake below and to the front. And Brian remembered the last time he had landed on a lake in a bush plane. If he had known about the flaps or how to use them, he wouldn't have been going half the speed when he hit the water. With a gentle landing, he might have had time to help the pilot get the survival pack out. He watched the pilot carefully, noted everything he did, and realized how lucky he'd been. The pilot flared the plane out so that when it came down to the lake, it seemed to be barely moving. He worked the wheel and rudder pedals to make it float down slowly and easily. Brian had more or less arrowed the plane into the water, through the trees and down. It was a miracle that he hadn't been killed. The answer to this problem had come to him while he slept. It was simple. The pilot was all business now, his hands working the controls, easing the throttle, settling the plane in the last bit down to the lake. But Derek turned and smiled at Brian. Pretty, isn't it? And the lake was pretty. It was almost perfectly round, pushing out toward an egg shape slightly, but only slightly. At the bottom edge of the lake and off to the right, a short distance, a river flowed south and east, and it was amazing to Brian how accurate the map had been. Then they had gone over it on the dining room table, showing his mother where they would be. But looking down on it now, it seemed to be almost a model made of the map. The blue of the lake matched the blue of the water on the map, and the river cutting southeast through the green forest looked as just as it had on the map, delicate, winding. Derek said something to the pilot. Brian couldn't hear over the sound of the engine, and the pilot nodded and banked the plane to the right, more toward the river, and put it softly onto the lake. There was absolutely no wind, and the water was as smooth as a mirror. Brian had watched out of his window as the float came down, and he saw its reflection in the water, closer, closer, until it touched itself and skimmed across the flatness. Okay, spider. Get away. I think that one, if it bit me, would make me sick. Had a big black abdomen. It skimmed across the flatness, settling more and more until the plane slowed nearly to a stop. The pilot headed out of the plane toward the clearing to the right of the river, left of the lake. nudging the throttle now and then to keep it moving on the floats until it at last slid through some green reeds and bumped the shoreline. He cut the engine. "We're here," Derek said, his voice loud in the sudden silence. "Let's get unloaded." He turned and Brian could see that he was excited. Like a kid, he thought. He's excited as a kid. I'm the kid here, and I'm not excited. That's because he doesn't know. I know he doesn't know. Derek climbed out onto the float, moving a little stiffly, and Brian noted that he wasn't very athletic, seemed not to be too coordinated, and stepped ashore. The pilot stayed in his seat, and Brian moved the passenger seat forward and clambered out of the plane, stepped onto the float, and then to the dry grass. Neat, he thought, neat and clean. The thought came into his mind that it was a beautiful day. The sun was out. There were small popcorn clouds moving across the sky. It was a soft summer afternoon. Then instantly, in just that part of a second, he changed completely. He became suddenly what he had been before at the lake, part of it, all of it, inside of it, so that every single little thing became important. Just like now, I'm hearing birds, and you don't see it, but there's a lot of little black flies that are kind of crawling on me. Oh, what do we got here? If you can, just listen. I just heard a woodpecker go. Hear it? Oh, and there's a hawk. And I can hear the breeze through the trees. The sky is completely 100% blue. That means at least there's no weather change in the foreseeable future. He didn't just hear birds singing, not just the background sound of birds, but each bird. He listened to each bird, located it, knew where it was by the sound, listened for the sound of alarm. He just didn't see clouds, but light clouds, scout clouds that came before the heavier clouds that could mean rain and maybe wind. The clouds were coming out of the northwest, and that meant that weather would come with them. Not could, but would. There would be rain. Tonight, late, there would be rain. His eyes swept the clearing, then up the edge of the clearing, and in those two sweeps he knew the clearing and the woods. There was a stump there that probably held grubs, hardwood there for a bow, and willows there for arrows. A game trail, probably deer. Moving off to the left meant other things: porcupines, raccoons, bears, wolves, moose, skunks. Skunk would be moving along the trail and into the clearing. He flared his nostrils, smelled the air, pulled the air along the side of his tongue in a hissing sound and tasted it. But there was nothing, just summer smells. The tanga pines, the soft mustiness of rotting vegetation. No animals, at least nothing fresh. Derek had seen the change, was staring at him. What happened? Brian shook his head. Nothing. Yes, something did. You changed completely. You're not the same person. Brian shrugged. Aware of that bug that was about to bite me. Okay. Tell me, Derek said. He took a notebook out of his pocket. Tell me everything you saw. Right now? Yes. Shouldn't we let the pilot go first? Derek turned as if seeing the plane for the first time. Oh, yes, I almost forgot. He has to get back. Let's unload, and then he can go, and you can tell me. No. What? Brian had made the decision just as he dozed off in the plane, and it had settled into his mind when he slept. He knew it was the right thing to do. We're not going to unload. What are you talking about? Brian looked at the lake, the clearing, the clouds, 7-8 hours to rain. I mean, if we unload all that gear, everything but the kitchen sink, like you said, this whole business will be ruined, wasted. I don't see what you mean. What happens if we have trouble? Brian nodded. That's exactly. We have trouble. That's what it is all about. You want to learn, but you have to have all that backup. It's just more games. It's not real. You wouldn't have that if the situation were real, would you? But we don't have to use it. We don't have to use any of it. Brian smiled, a small, almost sad smile. I promise you, absolutely promise you, that if that stuff is here, you will use it, and I will use it. By the third day, when the hunger really starts to work and the mosquitoes keep, speaking of mosquitoes, coming and coming, and there isn't any food in our tent, and we know it's just there, just in the bag, I guarantee you we will use it. We won't be able to not use it. So much talk, Brian thought, just jabber, jabber all the time. Like blue jays, we stand here and talk, and in 7-8 hours it will rain, and we don't have shelter, or dry wood, or fire going. Talk. Leave it all in the plane. Leave it, or I'm flying out of here right now. I know what's coming, and I don't want to waste it. But we told your mother. Brian hesitated inside. I know, but the rule still holds. If we unload, I'm going home, period. I'll take responsibility. Derek studied him. You mean it? Absolutely. How about a compromise? What do you mean? We keep the radio in case there's trouble, serious trouble. Then at least we can call for help. Brian rubbed his neck, thinking it wouldn't be the same. Even the radio would taint it. Still, he had told his mother not to worry, and he insisted on not using the radio, absolutely not using it. All right. Derek nodded and stepped past him, balanced along the float, and reached into the plane. He said something to the pilot, who nodded and looked at Brian through the windshield with a strange look, a studying look. Then he smiled and waved through the plastic, and Brian nodded and waved in return. Derek came back ashore with the radio, a small unit with a weatherproof seal and fresh NiCad batteries. He also carried a small plastic briefcase. For my papers, he said. I have to take notes, write things down. Brian nodded, smiling inside. Derek sounded almost like Brian sounded when he was speaking to his mother or father and wanted to do something. Pleading, for my papers? It was a strange feeling for Brian, the role reversal with an adult. He was in charge of an adult and he supposed in this situation it was the best way. But he was uncomfortable with it. The business of being in control over an adult, or anybody for that matter. The plane had to be turned. It was nosed into the reeds, and the pilot opened the window and asked them to aim the plane around so it could taxi out and take off. Derek and Brian worked it back and around, wading the water, pushing at the floats. The water felt warm to Brian, shore warm, and then it had aimed well out. The pilot started the engine. He taxied away without looking back, and as soon as he was clear of the reeds, he gunned the engine, increasing speed until the plane was roaring across the lake. It bounced once, then again, and it was airborne, climbed well over the trees at the end of the lake, circled and came back over them. The pilot wagged the wings as he watched, and then it was gone. Gone. Well, Derek said, here we are, alone. Brian nodded. He felt a strange loss at watching the plane leave in emptiness. What's next? Derek asked. How do we get the ball in play? Brian looked at him. A game. It's all a game. A fire. We need a fire and a shelter. Soon. Derek looked at him, a question in his eyes. Brian looked at the sky. It's a warm afternoon now, but with the evening, the mosquitoes will come, and we need smoke to keep them away until the coolness in the morning. And we need shelter because it's going to rain in about 6.5 hours. 6.5 hours? Sure. Can't you smell it? Derek took a breath through his nose, shook his head. Nope, not a thing. You will, Brian said. You will. Now, let's get the ball rolling. And he set off looking for a fire stone. Now, first 5 questions are on chapter 5. First question, what did Brian do on the plane on the way to the site in Canada? He fell asleep. Does this surprise you? To me it does, because don't forget, he almost died in a plane crash. This was think about it. If I was in that situation, I don't think I'd even want to go near a plane, never mind flying one ever again. Number 2, setting his time and place of this story. In chapter 3, Brian is about to land at the site. Please describe what the site looks like. Well, the site, again, is similar to this, except it's on a lake shore. You have trees, all types, but up north, it's mostly big pines like that one over there. Big pines, a lot of spruce trees. In fact, behind the camera is a spruce grove. I think we'll take a little walk there. Okay, and that's basically it. Time and place. We know it's the summertime. We know it's in Canada, and we know it's in the wilderness. Just like this. If you were to say, Mr. W, what's the setting of this little presentation? Well, it's in southern Worcester County in the deciduous forests, where you have a mix of hardwoods and softwoods, and it's late spring. The temperature's in the 70s. The insects are starting to come out, and I can hear different birds and other creatures. Okay. Okay. Number 3, when Brian stepped off the plane, he had a change. What was that change? Well, that change was he instantly became part of the environment. He went into what I call survival mode. When you step into a setting like this, you don't daydream. You pay attention to everything that's around you. You look and listen, smell, even feel. Okay? Oh, we get some lichen here. It's edible, but not that great. It'll keep you alive. Okay. Now, Brian and Derek had a disagreement on how the survival equipment should be conducted. Well, I should say experiment, and it has to do with equipment. What is the disagreement? Brian believed they had too much stuff. They had all of this survival equipment. They had a rubber raft, they had a gun, they had, a week's worth of food. He believed that it would become more of a camping trip than a survival experiment. And that was the big argument. And he finally relented on that. They decided, well, you'll find out in the next chapter. At the end of chapter 5, Brian could smell something. What was it? Well, end of chapter 5 here. Remember, okay, rain. He said right here. 6.5 hours, sure. Can't you smell it? Yeah. He can smell the changes in the air. It's about to rain. So that's it for now. We're going to read I'll read chapter 6 in a different setting. Okay? So, scooch over here and shut this thing off.